The valley was wide and green, a place of rivers that shone in the morning light and hills that carried gentle winds. At the center of this valley stood a tree so large that even mountains seemed smaller beside it. Its trunk was wider than 100 homes placed side by side, and its crown reached so high that the clouds often wrapped around its branches. The roots were deep, twisting like rivers of stone beneath the soil. To the native people of the valley, the tree was both a wonder and a curse. They were tall, slender beings with clear voices and hands skilled in crafting. They lived close to the land and treated nature as family. But this tree was different. It did not grow like the others, and it did not share its space. It stretched so far across the valley that sunlight could not pass through its endless leaves. The ground beneath it was dark, damp, and empty of smaller plants. The rivers bent around its roots, changing the path of water. For centuries, the natives had dreamed of opening the valley. They wished to farm the fertile soil, to build homes in the flat land, to let the rivers flow straight. But the tree stood in their way. They tried to cut it down, but every blade snapped, every saw broke, and every flame went out when pressed against the bark. The wood was harder than stone, and the roots drank water faster than fire could rise. The elders told stories about the tree. Some said it had fallen from the sky before their ancestors walked the land. Others claimed it had grown in a single night, sprouting from the core of the planet. Children were taught to stay away from its shadow. Many feared that trying to harm the tree would bring storms, hunger, or sickness. Yet as time passed, fear gave way to frustration. The valley was the heart of their world, and the tree denied them its gifts. They tried again and again to remove it. Great hammers were made from the hardest stones, but the bark swallowed their strikes. Axes forged from shining or bent after one swing. Even when they gathered hundreds of people with ropes and pulled, the tree stood tall without moving even a little. The people began to call it the silent obstacle. It did not speak. It did not move. It simply existed, stronger than their will, greater than their patience. It became a symbol of defeat. Whenever someone failed at a task, others would say, "It is like the silent obstacle. You cannot move it." Generations lived and died under its shadow. The valley remained closed. The people grew used to farming on the hillsides and building homes along the slopes. But each time they looked into the valley, they felt the same wound in their hearts. The land was theirs, yet not theirs. The tree was an unending reminder of their weakness. Children often asked why they could not burn the tree down. Their parents would answer with tired voices, telling them the flames climbed only a little before dying. Some suggested digging around the roots, but when they tried, the ground cracked and swallowed their tools. The more they struggled, the more the tree seemed eternal. There were those who learned to admire it. Poets sang of its vastness. Painters tried to capture its crown against the sky. Lovers met beneath its shadow, speaking of how even time would never erase such a giant. But beneath admiration, there was always bitterness. The people admired the tree not because they loved it, but because they could not change it. One day, a group of builders gathered in the council hall of stone. They spoke about the future of their people. The population was growing, and the hillsides no longer gave enough food. They needed the valley. They needed the soil and the water beneath, the roots of the silent obstacle. Yet none of them had an answer. The oldest among them struck his staff on the floor and said, "If even our strongest hands and sharpest tools cannot cut it, then perhaps it was never meant to fall." The words carried across the land. Many accepted them, believing the valley would remain lost forever. But deep in their hearts, some still dreamed of change. As seasons passed, the tree remained untouched. Storms came and went, but the tree stood firm. Rivers flooded and dried, but the roots still clung to the earth. The crown spread wider each year, casting longer shadows across the valley. Birds nested in its branches, and strange insects crawled across its bark. It became a world of its own, too strong to be challenged. Travelers from other lands came to see it. They were amazed by its size, whispering that such a tree could not exist anywhere else. Some tried to cut small pieces to take home, but their blades shattered, leaving only marks upon themselves. Even strangers left shaking their heads, muttering that no force could ever bring down such a living mountain. The natives continued their lives, carrying the weight of the silent obstacle in their hearts. Every festival, every song, every story had some mention of it. Some mocked it, some cursed it, and some worshipped it. But none could ignore it. It was not just a tree. It was a reminder that even the proudest people had limits. And yet, in the deep silence of the valley, there was something waiting. For all the centuries of failure, the story of the silent obstacle was not finished. It only waited for eyes that could see differently, for hands that would not give up, and for a mind that did not accept defeat. The day would come when strangers from the stars would walk into the valley, and among them would be one who looked at the impossible tree and did not bow her head. But for now, the silent obstacle stood untouched, a shadow across the lives of all who lived near it, holding the valley in its grip. The day the strangers came, the valley sky carried a light no one had ever seen before. It was not the glow of the sun, nor the pale shine of the moon, nor the glitter of stars. It was something new. A silver shape moved across the sky, cutting through clouds like a bird made of metal. The people of the valley stopped their work and looked upward. Some were afraid, some were curious, and some whispered that the sky itself was breaking open. The silver shape slowed as it reached the hills, and a sound like thunder rolled across the land. The elders called the people to gather on the slopes, where they could see safely from a distance. They watched as the silver bird lowered itself, opening wide legs of metal to touch the earth. A door slid open, and out stepped the humans. The natives of the valley had never seen such beings before. They were shorter than the natives, with heavier steps and stronger frames. Their skin came in many shades, and their hair fell in dark or light strands. They wore coverings of fabric and metal, strange tools hanging at their sides. The humans looked around with bright eyes, sharp and restless, as if everything was a question and nothing was beyond their reach. At first, silence ruled the valley. The natives did not move closer. They had lived with the silent obstacle for generations, and fear of the unknown ran deep in them. Yet the humans smiled and raised their hands in greeting. One of them, a man with a wide stance, spoke in a strong voice. The words were strange, but the tone was kind. Slowly, the natives answered, their voices soft, trying to understand. Over time, through patient signs and careful sounds, the two peoples began to share meaning. The humans explained that they had come from far away, from a world beyond the stars. They were explorers, moving from land to land, seeking knowledge and connection. The natives listened with wonder. To hear of other worlds and other skies shook their hearts, for they had never imagined that their valley was only a small part of something so vast. Days passed, and trust began to grow. The humans ate with the natives, sharing food from their own packs and tasting the roots and fruits of the valley. They traded small objects, shining tools that cut through stone, or lights that glowed without fire. Children followed them, laughing at their heavy footsteps and asking endless questions. The humans laughed back, teaching the children how to use some of their tools. Yet beneath the kindness and exchange, a quiet tension lived. The humans noticed the great tree at the center of the valley. They saw how its crown blocked the sun and how its roots twisted the rivers. When they asked why it remained, the natives lowered their heads. They explained that it could not be cut, could not be burned, could not be moved. They spoke of generations of failure and the name they had given it, the silent obstacle. The humans listened closely, where the natives spoke with voices of surrender. The humans frowned with interest. They walked to the valley floor. Standing at the base of the tree, they touched the bark, pressed their ears to the trunk, studied the roots and the branches. They did not look at it as a curse or mystery. They looked at it as a challenge. The natives grew uneasy. They whispered among themselves that the humans were reckless. Did they not understand the danger? Did they not fear the tree's strength? Some elders warned them not to anger it, but the humans only nodded and continued their study. One human stood out from the rest. Her name was Rana. She did not carry the heavy machines that others carried. She did not speak loudly or move quickly. Instead, she walked slowly around the tree, her eyes watching every line of the bark. every mark in the soil. She placed her hands on the ground, feeling the way the roots spread. She tapped the trunk with a small stone, listening to the sound it made. The natives noticed her patience. Unlike the others, she did not rush to act. She watched, thought, and listened. To some, this made her more worrying, for silence often hides deeper plans. To others, it made her seem wise, like someone who respected the power of the valley. At night, by the fire, Rana asked questions. How long had the tree stood? What had been tried against it? What tools had broken? What fires had been set? The natives told her all they knew, their voices carrying both pride and defeat. She nodded quietly, storing each detail in her mind. The next morning, she returned to the tree. She was not alone. A small group of natives followed her, unable to resist their curiosity. She pressed her hands against the bark again, looking up at the endless crown. She did not seem afraid. Instead, she seemed to be listening, as if the tree itself might tell her its secrets. The people of the valley whispered among themselves. Could this human truly believe she might succeed where thousands had failed? Did she not know that even the strongest axes had bent and the hottest flames had died? To them, the silent obstacle was eternal. To her, it was only a puzzle waiting to be solved. One elder, a woman with silver hair, spoke softly as she watched. The humans are strange. They do not accept what is fixed. They do not bow to what cannot be moved. This is their gift, and perhaps their danger. The others nodded, though they did not fully understand. They had lived for centuries under the shadow of the tree. To imagine a world without it was like imagining a sky without stars. Yet the humans did not carry such weight. They came from distant lands where the impossible had already been broken many times. They looked at the silent obstacle with fresh eyes, free of fear, free of surrender. And in that freedom lay the first spark of change. The valley did not know it yet, but history was already turning. The day the humans stepped out of their silver bird, the story of the silent obstacle began to shift. The natives had carried centuries of defeat, but the humans carried something else. They carried the belief that no wall was too high, no root too deep, no crown too wide. The tree still stood tall, silent, and unshaken. But for the first time in countless years, there were hands upon its bark that did not tremble, and eyes that did not look away. The days in the valley passed quietly, but the presence of humans changed the air. The natives went about their work as before, tending their hillside fields, guiding the streams, weaving cloth, and shaping stone. Yet wherever the humans walked, eyes followed. The people could not stop wondering what these strangers were planning. Rana, the human who had studied the silent obstacle with such care, became the focus of this curiosity. She was not loud or restless like some of her companions. Instead, she moved with calm steps. Observing everything, she watched the way the sunlight touched the tree's crown, the way shadows shifted at different hours, and the way the soil fell under her fingers. She studied with patience, not rushing. And this unsettled many natives more than bold actions would have. Every morning, Rana left the camp the humans had built on the hills. She carried only a pack with simple tools, a small axe, a shovel, a coil of rope, and a notebook. The children often followed her at a distance, whispering to each other. They laughed at her small axe, for they remembered how even their strongest iron blades had shattered when striking the bark. They laughed at her rope, for it seemed too thin to move anything so massive. Yet Rana paid them no mind. She listened to the ground with her hands, pressed her ear to the trunk, and tapped gently with stones to hear the sound within. The natives grew uneasy. Some elders warned that disturbing the silent obstacle too often might wake a curse. They urged Rana to leave it be, but when they spoke, she only smiled politely and said in her careful words, "Every living thing has a way it grows and a way it breaks." Her voice carried no pride, only certainty. This made the natives both nervous and curious. They had always thought of the tree as eternal, unchanging, untouchable. To hear a human speak of it as something with weaknesses was like hearing someone speak of breaking the sky. At night, around the fires, the humans spoke together. Some wanted to use machines from their silver ship to cut into the tree with heat and energy. Others argued that such force might harm the valley itself. Rana listened but did not join their arguments. She kept to her quiet thoughts, drawing small sketches in her notebook, lines of roots, marks on the bark, and patterns of growth. The natives sometimes sat nearby, pretending not to listen but catching fragments of her words. They heard her speak of pressure, of fire guided by water, of cuts made at certain angles. These were ideas strange to them. They had always attacked the tree with strength alone. They had never thought to study its nature, to understand how it lived. One morning, Rana approached a group of natives who were gathering fruit. She asked them for stories about the tree. At first, they hesitated, for the silent obstacle was not a subject they liked to discuss. But her patience softened them, and slowly they began to tell what they knew. They spoke of how the bark changed, color in different seasons, how certain insects nested near its roots, how sometimes in storms a branch would fall but never crack. Rana listened closely, nodding, asking questions. She did not laugh at their words, nor did she dismiss their fears. The more she learned, the more her plan began to form. She understood that the tree's strength lay not only in its hard bark, but in the way its roots bound the valley floor. To strike it at the wrong place was useless, but to weaken it at the right points, to use fire and water together, to cut not with brute force, but with patience, this, she believed, could bring it down still. She did not rush each day. She returned to the tree, making small tests. She poured water at one root and watched how the soil shifted. She lit a tiny fire against the bark, measuring how long it burned before fading. She placed stones and patterns around the base to see how shadows moved. The natives watched her with growing wonder. To them, her actions seemed simple, almost foolish, yet there was a quiet confidence in her work that made them uneasy. Children began to follow her more boldly, asking why she tapped the bark or why she dug small holes near the roots. Rana answered them in her calm way, explaining that every sound told a story. Every root carried a secret, and every mark revealed something hidden. The children carried these words home, repeating them to their families. Slowly, the adults began to see her not as reckless, but as someone who sought knowledge before action. One elder, the woman with silver hair, visited Rana as she worked. She watched silently for a long time before speaking. Our people have tried for centuries with strength. You come with patience. But tell me, human, if you succeed, what then? Will you only take the valley for yourself? Rana paused, wiping soil from her hands. She looked at the elder and shook her head. I do not take what is not mine. I help because you wish to grow, because the tree has trapped you. I will cut what you could not, but the valley will still be yours. Her words spread through the people, easing some of their fear. Yet others remained doubtful. They wondered if humans were truly so selfless, after all. Why else would they come from the stars as the days passed? The bond between Rana and the valley deepened. She began to rise before dawn, working in the cool silence while mist covered the ground. She traced the shape of the roots with chalk, marking the points where pressure could be placed. She carved shallow lines in the bark, careful not to waste effort. Her eyes carried a light that seemed to see beyond what was visible. The natives began to gather in the distance, watching quietly. They had lived too long under the shadow of the silent obstacle to believe it could ever fall. Yet something in Rana's steady work stirred a spark in them. For the first time in generations, they felt a small flame of hope. The tree remained tall, silent, and unmoved, but the air in the valley had shifted. Where before there had been only defeat, now there was the sense of a waiting storm. The silent obstacle had faced countless hands before, but never hands that combined patience with determination. And though no branch had yet fallen, the people knew in their hearts that the story of the valley had entered a new chapter. The valley had always known the silent obstacle as something eternal. It stood in the center like a mountain of wood, too strong for flame, too deep for tools, too vast for ropes. For centuries, the people had failed against it. Yet as days turned into weeks, they began to notice a change. It was not the tree that changed, but the air around it. The steady work of the human, Rana, carried a weight that touched everyone who watched. Each morning, Rana came to the base of the tree. She carried only simple tools, her axe, her shovel, her rope, and a set of small containers filled with water and oil. The natives gathered on the hills to watch, their voices low, their hearts uncertain. They did not believe the tree could fall, but they could not look away. Rana began by cutting deep grooves at the base. She did not strike wildly like those who had tried before. Instead, she carved with care, working hour after hour, day after day. Each line measured and deliberate. The bark was hard, harder than stone, and her axe often slipped. But when one edge dulled, she sharpened it. When her hands grew sore, she wrapped them in cloth and kept working. The natives whispered among themselves. They had tried many times, with sharper blades and stronger arms, yet the tree had stood without a scar. But now, under Rana's hands, the grooves slowly deepened. The bark did not bend or shatter her tools. Instead, it cracked in narrow lines, like an old wall touched by time. When she rested, Rana set small fires in the grooves she had carved. The flames burned low. Guided by channels of oil she had prepared, she fanned them gently, feeding them with dry grass, then cooled the bark with water to make it brittle. She repeated this again and again, weakening the wood little by little. The people had never thought to use fire and water together, but now they saw the truth of it. The bark that had always resisted flame began to split under the sudden change of heat and cold. As the days passed, the tree groaned. At first, it was only a faint sound, like the creak of old wood in the wind. But soon, even the children could hear it. The silent obstacle was no longer fully silent. Its voice carried through the valley, low and heavy, as if the giant itself felt the pressure. The natives grew restless. Some felt joy, others fear. Was this the moment their curse would finally end? Or would the tree fight back in some way no one expected? Elders argued among themselves. Some said the human should stop, for the tree had stood since the beginning and must not be touched. Others said the work should continue, for the valley could not grow while the tree ruled it. But Rana paid no mind to their arguments. She moved with the same calm patience, her eyes fixed on the task. Her companions, the other humans, sometimes offered machines and stronger tools. But she shook her head. Strength without understanding breaks itself, she said. This tree must be cut with care, not pride. Then came the day when the first great crack appeared. It ran up the trunk, wide enough for a hand to fit inside. The sound shook the valley, a deep thunder that sent birds screaming from the branches. The natives gasped, for never before had they seen such a mark upon the silent obstacle. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sight. Rana did not celebrate. She studied the crack, then returned to her work. She set new fires, poured new water, struck with her axe, and widened the wound. The tree groaned louder, shaking with each strike. The ground trembled as if the roots themselves were resisting. Yet the grooves deepened, the cracks widened, and the crown swayed. For 3 days, the valley held its breath each hour. More people gathered on the hillsides to watch. They saw the human climbing the roots, driving wedges into the trunk, guiding the flames with careful channels of oil. They heard the tree's voice grow louder, like the roar of a storm. It was no longer the silent obstacle. It was the falling giant. On the 4th morning, the moment came. Rana stood before the tree, sweat on her face, her clothes blackened by smoke. She struck once more with her axe, and the valley echoed with a sound like the breaking of mountains. The tree shook from root to crown, its branches thrashing against the clouds. The people cried out in fear and wonder as the giant leaned to one side. The roots tore from the ground, ripping soil and stone apart. The rivers bent in new paths, water rushing wildly. The air filled with the roar of breaking wood as the crown fell, smashing against the earth with a force that shook the hills. Dust and leaves filled the sky, covering the valley in a storm of green and brown. When the sound finally faded, the valley stood in silence. Where once the giant had towered, there now lay a fallen colossus, stretching across the land like a broken wall. The natives stared with wide eyes, unable to believe what they had seen. The tree that had stood for centuries, that had resisted every hand, now lay dead upon the ground. Rana stood quietly, her axe at her side, her eyes calm. She did not raise her arms in triumph or shout in victory. She only looked at the fallen tree and nodded, as if she had completed a promise. The natives began to whisper. Some wept with joy, for the valley was now free. Others trembled, fearing what such power might mean. If a human could bring down the silent obstacle, what else could they do? Were they saviors or dangers? The elder with silver hair stepped forward. She looked at the fallen tree, then at Rana. Her voice shook as she spoke. You have done what we could not in 100 generations. You have broken the unbreakable. The valley is open, but tell us, human, what will you do now that the giant has fallen? Rana looked at her, then at the people gathered on the hills. Her answer did not come yet, for her work was not finished. But the valley knew one truth. The silent obstacle was gone, and nothing would ever be the same again. The valley was never silent after the fall of the giant tree. For days the ground smelled of broken wood and wet soil. Dust still floated in the air, and the rivers ran brown, where roots had torn through stone. The people walked among the fallen branches, touching them with hesitant hands. They could not believe the silent obstacle, which had stood for countless generations, now lay like a dead animal across their land. At first, there was joy. Children ran across the massive trunk, laughing as they bounced on its surface. Farmers looked at the wide space of soil now open to the sun, and dreamed of fields larger than any they had ever planted. Builders spoke of houses rising on flat land instead of cramped hillsides. Songs were sung around fires, and many lifted their voices in praise of Rana, the human who had made this possible. But joy never lasts without shadow. As the days stretched on, questions grew. The elders gathered and spoke in worried tones. They asked each other, if a human can cut down what we could not, what else might they do? If their tools and their patience can break what we called eternal, is there anything that could resist them? The younger ones did not understand this fear. To them, Rana was a hero. She had freed the valley, given them new hope, and shown that even the strongest walls could fall. They followed her with admiration, asking her to teach them her methods. Some even took up small tools, copying the way she carved and burned, hoping to learn the secrets of human persistence. But the older generation had lived too long under the shadow of the tree to feel easy. They knew what it meant for something thought unmovable to be moved. Change was powerful, and power could be dangerous. One evening, the elder with silver hair stood on the hillside before a gathering of her people. The fallen tree stretched behind her like a broken horizon. She lifted her hand and spoke with a voice that carried across the valley. We have dreamed of this moment for centuries. The valley is open, the sun reaches the soil, and the rivers flow where we need them, yet I feel no peace in my heart. Do you? The people murmured, uncertain. Some said they felt only joy. Others lowered their heads, sharing her unease. The elder continued, we could not move this tree. We lived with it, cursed it, and accepted it. Then the humans came, and one among them cut it down. We call this victory, but it is not truly ours. It belongs to them. What happens tomorrow if they choose to cut something else? What happens if they decide that we, too, are only obstacles? The words spread like fire through the people. Fear grew, and with fear came division. Some stood with the elder, saying the humans were dangerous. Others argued that Rana had shown kindness, not pride. She had worked with care, not arrogance. She had given the valley freedom without asking for reward. Still, doubt remained. Rana herself seemed unaware of the growing unease. She spent her days quietly, walking among the fallen branches, studying the patterns of the broken wood. She spoke little, only offering small guidance when the people asked. She did not boast, nor did she demand anything in return. Yet her silence did not calm their worries. The children, bold as always, asked her questions without fear. Will you cut down other trees? Will you build your own home here? Do humans always break what stands in their way? Rana only smiled and shook her head. she said. "I did not cut the tree for myself. I did it because you wished to use your valley. Every living thing has its time to stand, and its time to fall. This tree's time had ended." Some repeated her words with hope, but others thought them dangerous. If humans believed everything had a time to fall, then what was safe? Even mountains, even people? The unease grew stronger when the other humans began speaking of building. They looked at the open valley and saw opportunity. They suggested placing machines there to study the soil, to set up homes, to test how the rivers might be used for power. Their voices were not unkind, but their eagerness frightened the natives. They began to ask themselves whether the valley would truly remain theirs, or whether it would slowly be taken. One night, the council of natives gathered in secret. They sat in a ring of firelight, their faces marked with worry. Some wanted to ask the humans to leave at once. Others warned that such a demand might anger them. A few said that perhaps it was better to live under the tree's shadow than to risk losing their freedom. The elder with silver hair spoke again. "We cannot deny that the humans are powerful, but power is not always a curse. Perhaps we should not fear them, but we must not depend on them either. If we allow them to solve every problem, then we will forget how to solve our own." The council agreed to watch closely to see what the humans would do next. The next morning, the natives noticed something surprising. Rana did not join her companions in their talk of building. Instead, she carried a small bag into the valley. Inside it were seeds. She knelt where the great tree had once rooted itself and pressed one seed into the soil. Then another and another. She poured water gently, covering them with care. The natives gathered around her, whispering. They asked, "Why do you plant again after cutting down the great tree?" Rana looked up and answered softly, "Because a valley without trees is not complete. The giant was too strong, too heavy, and it blocked your future. But a new tree can grow, smaller, kinder, sharing the light and water instead of taking it all. To cut is one task. To plant is the next." Her words spread quickly through the valley. For some, they lifted the fear from their hearts. Rana was not a destroyer, but a builder. She had given, not taken. Yet for others, the unease remained. If humans could both destroy and create, then their choices carried even greater weight. That night, as the stars shone over the valley, the people lay awake with mixed feelings. Gratitude and fear lived side by side. The silent obstacle had fallen, but a new question now stood in its place. Could they trust the humans to use their power with wisdom? Or would the valley one day regret inviting them into their world? The fallen tree no longer cast its shadow, but a different shadow now rested on every heart. The valley was wide and open now, for the first time in living memory. Sunlight reached the soil where the giant tree had once stood. Its shadow no longer covered the land, and the ground felt warm beneath the people's feet. The fallen trunk lay across the valley floor like a massive bridge of wood, its branches stretching into the distance. The people had gained space to grow, but their hearts were still restless. Fear lingered among them. They could not forget how the human Rana had done what their strongest hands and sharpest tools had failed to do. She had cut down the silent obstacle, something they thought eternal. They admired her, yet many still whispered in doubt. If she could cut down the unmovable tree, what else might humans decide to break? But Rana did not act like someone hungry for power. She did not boast or demand gifts. She did not take the valley for herself. Instead, she walked quietly across the open soil with a small bag in her hand. The people followed at a distance, curious about her purpose. At the center of the valley, where the tree's roots had once spread like rivers of wood, Rana knelt. She touched the soil with her fingers, feeling its softness. The people gathered around her, watching silently. From the bag, she pulled out a seed. It was small, round, and ordinary to the eye. Yet she held it with the care one might give to a treasure. She pressed the seed into the ground and covered it gently with soil. Then she poured water over it from a small vessel she carried. Her hands moved slowly, with patience and respect. When she finished, she sat back on her heels and looked at the people who stood around her. "This valley has lost a tree," she said in her calm voice. It was too strong, too heavy, and it blocked your future. But a valley without trees is empty. So I plant another in its place. It will not grow as large as the giant, but it will grow enough to give shade, to give shelter, and to remind you of what stood here before." Her words carried softly in the air, but they struck deep into the hearts of those who heard them. For the first time since the giant had fallen, the people felt something new. They felt peace. Children stepped closer to look at the spot where she had planted the seed. To them it seemed strange that something so small could matter after the fall of something so great. One child asked, "Why plant a small tree when the giant was so strong?" Rana smiled gently and answered, "Strength is not always about size. The giant took everything for itself, but a smaller tree can live in harmony with others. It can grow beside fields, beside homes, beside rivers. It can give without taking all." The elder with silver hair, who had spoken against trusting the humans, stood watching her. She felt a strange warmth in her chest as she listened. For years she had feared that humans would bring only destruction. Yet here was one who cut down only what needed to fall and who gave back more than she took. Rana did not stop with one seed each morning. She came to the valley with her small bag and planted another. She placed some near the rivers, where water would feed them. She placed some on the edges of the open fields, where they would give shade to farmers. She placed some on the hillsides, where birds might one day nest. Every seed she planted was a gift, not to herself but to the people and the land. The natives began to join her. At first, they only watched, but soon they brought their own seeds and planted them beside hers. They learned to dig carefully, to place the seeds deep enough for roots to take hold, and to water them gently. The children laughed as they carried water in bowls, racing to see who could help the most. The valley, which had been a place of fear and unease, now became a place of renewal. Instead of arguing about what humans might destroy, the people began to speak about what they could build together. They dreamed of orchards, of groves where families could rest, of wood that could be harvested without harm. The gift of the human was not only the seeds but also the hope they carried. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, the elder with silver hair approached Rana. She bowed her head slightly, a sign of respect. "You cut what we could not," she said, "and you planted what we did not think to plant. Tell me, why do you care for a valley that is not your own?" Rana looked at her with steady eyes. "Because every place is part of the same story. My people travel among the stars, but we do not live in every place we see. We leave behind gifts so that those who remain may remember that they are not alone. To cut is only half the work. To plant is the other half." The elder was silent for a long time. Then she nodded slowly. "Perhaps our fear was too heavy. Perhaps we judged too quickly. You have shown us that humans are not only breakers of what stands in their way. You are also planters of what will grow after." Her words spread among the people, and their unease began to fade. They no longer looked at the humans as threats, but as partners. They saw Rana not as a destroyer, but as a gardener who gave them a future. As weeks passed, the first shoots began to rise from the soil. Tiny green stems broke through the earth where Rana had planted the seeds. The people gathered around them with awe, for they were proof that life could begin again even after something as massive as the silent obstacle had fallen. Children touched the young leaves with wonder, and farmers promised to guard them as they grew. The valley no longer felt like a place of loss. It felt like a place of beginnings. The fallen tree still lay across the land, its trunk massive and unmoving, but now it seemed less like a wound and more like a memory. New life grew round it, promising that the valley's story was not an end but a turning point. And every time the people looked at the small shoots rising from the soil, they remembered the human who had cut what they could not and who had given them something greater in return. Seasons passed, and the valley began to change. Where the giant tree had once stood, new green life now spread. The seeds that Rana planted with her patient hands grew into young trees. Their leaves reached upward to the sun, and their roots drank from the rivers that once belonged only to the silent obstacle. The The soil that had been dark and lifeless for centuries now shone with fresh grass and wildflowers. The people of the valley gathered often at the place where the first seed had grown. It became a meeting ground, a place of stories and memory. Children played under the small branches, and elders sat in the shade, speaking of how the valley had once been trapped in shadow. Now the sunlight touched every corner, and the air carried the song of birds returning to nest in the new growth. The fallen trunk of the silent obstacle remained where it had collapsed. Its wood stretched across the valley like the body of a sleeping giant. Some wanted to cut it apart for a building, but the council decided otherwise. They chose to leave it where it lay, a reminder of the old world. They began to call it the Great Memory. It was no longer a curse or an obstacle. It was a monument to both their struggle and their freedom. Stories about Rana spread quickly. The people called her the one who cut and planted. They spoke of her patience, her quiet strength, and her gift. Children grew up hearing her story at night by the fire. They learned that humans were not only strong but also kind, that they could break what seemed unbreakable, but also give back more than they had taken. Rana herself did not ask for such honor. She continued her work quietly, planting seeds, teaching the people how to care for young trees, and showing them how to balance cutting with planting. When her companions suggested building machines in the valley, she gently refused. "This place belongs to those who live here," she said. "We came to help, not to rule." Her words brought peace to the people. They began to see that humans were not seekers of control, but carriers of knowledge and hope. Still, the unease of the past left a lesson. The people did not forget the fear they had felt when the tree fell. Instead, they turned it into wisdom. They learned that power was neither good nor evil on its own. It was the heart that used it that decided what it became. Years passed. The small trees grew taller, their crowns spreading wider each season. The valley became a place of balance. Farmers planted their fields in the sunlight. Builders raised homes along the riverbanks, and the new trees gave shelter without stealing. All the light, the people learned to live with them, shaping the valley into a harmony of fields, homes, and groves. The first tree that Rana planted grew stronger than the rest. Its trunk widened. Its branches stretched toward the sky, and its leaves glimmered in the wind. It did not grow as large as the silent obstacle, but it carried a special meaning. The people named it the Tree of Renewal. They decorated its branches during festivals with ribbons and carved stones, and they sang beneath it to honor both their ancestors and the human who had given them this gift. When travelers came from distant lands to see the valley, the people told them the story. They spoke of the giant tree that no one could cut, the rival of humans from the stars, and the one who succeeded where all others failed. But they always ended the story with the planting of the new tree. To them, that was the true heart of the tale. Cutting down was only half the lesson. Planting again was the greater truth. Rana watched all this with quiet eyes. She did not stay forever, for her people were travelers of the stars, always moving to new places. But before she left, she stood with the elder of silver hair beside the Tree of Renewal. The elder spoke to her with gratitude. "You came as a stranger, and many feared you. Yet you leave as family. Your work will live longer than any of us. This valley will remember you not for the tree you cut, but for the tree you planted." Rana bowed her head and answered softly, "Remember not me, but the lesson. Every ending carries the seed of a beginning. When something falls, plant again. That is the way of life." The people carried her words deep in their hearts. They watched as she and her companions returned to the silver ship. With a roar of sound and light, the ship rose into the sky and vanished beyond the clouds. The valley grew silent again, but it was no longer the silence of shadow. It was the silence of peace. Generations later, the valley children still gathered under the Tree of Renewal. They played in its shade and listened to the stories of their ancestors. The elders told them how a giant once ruled the valley, how it seemed eternal, and how it fell by the hands of a human. But they always reminded the children of the second part of the story, the more important part, how a seed was planted in its place, giving new life. The children grew up with this lesson. When they cut wood, they planted new trees. When they took from the land, they gave back to it. They learned that strength was not only in breaking, but also in restoring. And whenever they looked at the tree of renewal, they remembered the human who had shown them this truth. The valley was no longer trapped by the silent obstacle. It was no longer a land of defeat. It had become a land of balance, memory, and hope. The fallen giant remained as the great memory. The new tree rose as the tree of renewal. And the people carried a new name for the humans in their songs. They called them the people who build after breaking. And so the story lived on. Not only in the valley, but in the hearts of all who heard it. The human who cut down the tree they could not, and who planted another in its place, left behind more than open land. She left a legacy that grew, season by season, into the future.